You, yeah, you may be doing something really special or important, and you may need help getting the word out. We got you. Email us at guestwhopod@ppoiseum.com about advertising to our listeners.
Hosted by Maliek Blade.
This week's guest is
Pastor and author Keith Battle. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, Malik. Thanks for having me. Appreciate being on.
Not a problem. So you have a book out that I wanted to share with the audience that I think is really interesting and intriguing and will get the attention of many. The title is Sidechickology: Why Men and Women Cheat, Understanding, Avoiding, and Recovering from Infidelity. Now, I don't think any of us are strangers to the idea of infidelity, whether it's marriage or in a dating relationship, whether we were the perpetrator or the victim or whatever the case may be. It's a very common topic, and it's even in the news now as far as pop culture. But before jumping into the nooks and crannies of today's conversation, I wanted to first start with this. So, as I mentioned, you're a pastor, and have had the opportunity to work in a lot of different ministry capacities. Never actually pastored, but been in and around it for a while. And through seeing certain things, but also speaking to women in the church and in other sectors, unfortunately, there are lots of stories of infidelity. I actually have a specific friend I think of in mind who who will now say that she's never dating men in ministry or preachers again because she has such a terrible experience with the pastor. Uh, so I have seen, I don't want to make a blanket statement, but I have seen in many different cases a culture of infidelity, even amongst pastors. So, with you as a pastor choosing to delve in on this topic and draw attention to it, was there any hesitation around it or any backlash you foresaw being in the space that you're in by drawing attention to this conversation?
That's a great question. And I think part of the answer to what your friend is experiencing is I think when you're in a public servant position, a public servant role, whether you're a pastor of a local church or whether you're a community activist or a community leader, a politician, whenever you serve people continuously, one of the challenges is that you, in your private world, after you've given and given and given so much, one of the temptations is this sense of entitlement. Like, now that I've helped everybody else out, now it's time to do me. And I think that's one of the strongest temptations that people in public service live with, is that at the end of the day, when they've helped the poor and prayed for the sick and given lessons to, if you really study many of our civil rights leaders, there was a lot of inequities going on and iniquities, if you will, that were going on. And it's really because when people lay their heads down to rest or supposedly rest, there's this temptation that, I've given so much, it's now time for me to receive and me to do me. And so I think that's part of the challenge. To your question about backlash, I really wasn't concerned about backlash because I knew that my motive was to help people, to bring light on something that we don't like talking about with transparency. And I felt that if I wrote about it in a way that was comprehensive, that was transparent, that had enough humor in it to lighten the subject enough, but enough seriousness about it so that we know the dangers of this behavior, that it would be more helpful to people, that the people it would help would override any people who would be offended or feel like I'm outing people or what have you. So it was a risk that I was willing to take.
Yeah.
And I'm still comfortable with having taken the risk.
Right. So I'm glad you mentioned the civil rights thing because I was actually intending to go there. because literally as we speak, there's an article that's kind of going viral right now, or there's a lot of attention from the Daily Mail. And for the sake of time, I can't exhaustively go through it, but I'll just say the title of the article from the Daily Mail is Martin Luther King Jr. had 40 affairs and laughed as friend raped woman.
Mm.
And, you know, I have had the opportunity to work in a lot of white church spaces too that are more evangelical. And a lot of times they critique Dr. King on two things. They'll critique him on certain theological views, and they critique him on his infidelity.
Yeah.
And sometimes people have a hard time responding to that, specifically men of the cloth or pastors, as we know he was a preacher. But also, obviously, he did great things. So if you could speak to how you think through people that are doing good socially, whether it be pastoring or the type of social work that Dr. King did, how should we perceive, so to say, our heroes if we consider the good they did, but also certain things like the infidelities, in this case of Dr. King? How should we perceive heroes in light of their good and their bad? Do certain bads outweigh other bads? How do we measure, or how should we think through that?
I think you hit it on the head. How should we evaluate or measure heroes? And it's the first two letters in the word that we're talking about people, whether it's a he or she, Ro. What we fail to acknowledge is the humanity of these humanitarians, of these people who are doing great work, or who put out great art, or who put out great music, or who are very talented in their industry, whatever it may be. We're talking about in the corporate sector. We're talking about in the entertainment sector. We're talking about people when their laundry is really shaken out, regardless of who they are, it seems like there's a dark side to every powerful person. Mm-hmm. And I think, Maliek, that dark side is fed by an imbalance in their life. Like when you do too much of anything, you tend to swing in this with the same level of tension and intensity into the wrong thing. So when you have a person that's marching and whose life is at risk all the time and pleading for justice and meeting with legislators and constantly being under threat, but they don't go bowling, they don't go fishing, they don't watch football games. Their downtime is strategizing for the next move. What I found in my own life is that I was never having fun. I'm talking about healthy fun. So my whole world was around family and church, family and church, family and ministry. So I worked at the church and I worked when I got home, and I helped my kids with homework and gave them baths and played with them. Like, even though I was playing with my kids as a parent, that's labor, that's work. I didn't go to sporting events. I didn't go just hang out with my buddies and go to Buffalo Wild Wings and watch a game. I had no balance in my life. So when I got emotional to somebody and that was fun, it was just a different vibe altogether. It was wrong. But what I've learned how to do now is I have balance in my life. I have other things that I do besides serve the community and preach the word and try to fight for justice. And I do other things that are not ministry related, and they're not immoral. They're just healthy things. And I think what you'll find in many of those cases, like even we can talk about Michael Jackson, we can talk about other artists who get caught up in this dark space. But if you look at their life outside of their performing, they don't have a life. And sometimes that's nullified by fame. Like when you have to put on a mask just to go to the grocery store, that's a pretty imprisoned life. But I think we have to find a way to find a balance in our life so that we're not trying to make up for a deficit of fun in our life by a dark way of pleasing and satisfying ourselves. Does that make sense?
Definitely. I think framing it that way is helpful for people who may not be in the spotlight to understand the implications of being in that type of position to perform. And I think that applies to pastors, singers, rappers, whatever the case may be, that expectation is there. And sometimes it takes a while to understand balance and realizing who you are outside of what you do.
Yes, that's a great way of putting it. Because I am just who I am. I am not what I do. And we tend to be so consumed and so absorbed by the work that we do, and we gain all of our identity, especially on social media. all of our followers recognize us for what we do, not necessarily who we are. I'm just a guy. I'm a brother. I'm a nephew. I'm a son. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a friend. We just get so identified as a podcaster, a blogger, an activist, a minister, a communicator, an artist. But that's just something that we have the ability to do or the passion to do. But it's not the sum total of who we are. There's so many more aspects to who we are. And when we're out of balance in those other areas, we do tend to go dark quickly because, and it's not just about people who are celebrities or public. I'm just saying anybody who has a life of imbalance, to me, is in danger of of getting engaged in things that are unhealthy, like drugs and alcohol and other, abusive habits or addictive habits can really be born out of a life of imbalance.
Mm-hmm. So you're a pastor, as we mentioned. So you preach every week from the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
You could have done a commentary on the book of Ruth or Acts or Ephesians, but you chose to write a book on side chicks.
Yeah.
Why that?
So it's my second book. My first book was on leadership.
Okay.
My passion is leadership, relationships, and business. So
Understood. Okay.
those are kind of my sweet spots. And so purpose, I would say purpose is a big deal for me. So I'll probably write a business book and a purpose book too. But really, the book is really about protecting monogamous relationships. Mm-hmm. And so in the Bible, I did a sermon once called Sidechickology. I was studying the book of Proverbs and looking at what Proverbs 5, 6, and 7 calls an adulteress, or what they called in the 19th and 20th century a mistress, right? But they call it a side chick now. So I couldn't call it mistressology or
right. You're current with the time. So big ups to you for that.
Oh, my man. Ology is the study of something. It could,
right.
So anything you're studying, theology, the study of God, geology, the study of rocks, sociology, the study of society. So the sidechickology is the study of a mistress. It's a study of somebody you're cheating with. But I also talk about side slicks in the book because men and women cheat. And what I do with the book, Maliek, is I unpack why people do it. Because a lot of people just get mad that you're a dog or you're a tramp or you're a thought. And we kind of label people because of their behavior, but we don't study the pathology. And what I found was in my own life and in 30 years of meeting with couples and doing counseling and relationship coaching was that there's a significantly consistent pattern that accompanies people who cross the line of fidelity. It's consistent every time in every situation. And I said, when I kept seeing it, I was like, I got to put this in a book because nobody's talking about why. And here's why. It's not to justify the behavior. It's to be aware of it so that I know when it's coming. What the book does is it gives people a sense of how to know when infidelity is nearby, when we're moving in that direction. So how do I avoid it? How can I understand why it happens? Because you know what? If I don't know why I keep doing something, I'm more than likely to do it. But if I know, every time I miss my mother or every time I feel rejected, this is why I turn to pornography, or every time, this person rejects me or doesn't return my calls, I go into this state of depression. You have to follow. Your behavior often follows your feelings and your thoughts. And what Sidechickology is it follows the thinking and emotions connected to infidelity, which is why I'm really excited about the book, because I've never seen any writing about it at that level. We just write novels on people cheating, but this goes into the psychology behind it.
Definitely. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot too on a deeper level, as far as what we accept as norms socially. And what are the implications of those things? But we'll get to that a little later. So I have a few things I'm going to pull from the culture and ask for you to respond to. The first is I think it's just happened earlier this week or last week, but I guess there was an interview with the comedian and an actress, Monique. And she was saying that she believes that specifically black women, should be more open to allowing their men to have other women, to not allow, I guess, societal pressures to make you feel like monogamy is the only way. And she's trying to get people to be more open to open relationships, specifically for the man to have uh, other women. But also, I have some audio here. I believe this was recorded in Africa, and the lady speaking's name is Olumide. And I guess this is during a debate. But this clip actually I saw was being shared by a lot of brothers, pretty much, trying to get women to accept the ideas being propagated with this clip. So I'm going to play this audio for you and let me know what you think.
Okay.
Biologically, sex is designed for one main purpose: procreation. Anything else, that's extra. The female reproductive cycle comes around once a month. For a man, it's every day. For each sexual act, the woman's one egg is matched by the man's 120 million sperm cells. And let's do some calculation. 120 million sperm cells a day, every day, as opposed to one egg a month every month, means, assuming all the cells are viable, that it will take only 30 men to impregnate all the women in the world. This points to one clear fact: a man is, by nature, polygamous. Monogamy and fidelity are unnatural situations promulgated by religious beliefs and social pressures. Take those away, every man would cheat. It's simply biological. Now let's look at the extra. It's a known fact that women, for the most part, are more emotional than men. So it's natural that after a sexual encounter, she'll be attached. But because a man is visual and logical in nature, there's no emotion involved. For him, it's just a physical release that's got nothing to do with love. A man loves his woman by protecting and providing for her. Period. It's really quite simple. For a man, the physical and the emotional, two separate.
So basically, she's making the argument that men by nature are polygamous, and she's drawing to the fact that we produce millions of sperm cells, whereas women produce a few eggs. So we're naturally meant to be polygamous. The idea of monogamy is just due to social pressure, and that for men, sex is not an emotional act, it's just a physical act.
Yeah. So first of all, I thought her analysis and assessment was brilliant. And so let me take off my preacher hat for a second. And just as a man, I mean, what man wouldn't agree with that? Like, oh man, that would be dope. Like we get a hall pass. We get a cheap pass. Like, that's like going into a restaurant and having to choose between salmon and sea bass and trout and all. Give it all to me. Like, put the platter out there. And I like how she raised the point that this boundary from polygamy to monogamy is more based on social and religious pressure. Now, this is where my pastor's hat comes on. See, because I live in a faith space, I didn't write the rules of monogamy. The rules of monogamy were created before I got here. And what I see in scripture, in the Bible, is this boundary that there should be a committed relationship between one man and one woman. That's kind of the way I do. So whatever somebody, may debate, that's kind of the space that I've been trained and raised up in. That being the case, it goes beyond that to, I don't know whether my wife would go for that or not. Like, all hail Mr. Sidney for being married to Monique, and maybe he has that luxury. And I think most men, just as you go back into the scriptures, when Abraham's wife, at the time his name was Abrams, his wife Sarai, recommended a side chick from her. He had a wife approved side chick named Hagar, and she says, you're going to have sex with her and she's going to have our kids for us. And it was a wonderful arrangement until it worked and backfired at the same time, because though Hagar got pregnant with Abram's child, the Bible says that she started despising Sarah. And I think when you start introducing more than one person into an intimate circle, it only works if there is camaraderie and understanding, or if you can separate it to where there's no discovery of it, which means you're living a duplicitous life, which being conflicted like that has its own consequences. Hiding, the time it takes to hide a relationship. So if we're talking about people living in an open marriage or an open relationship where the man has permission to go out. I know I'm not in that kind of relationship. I don't think my wife would approve of it. With that being said, and I've never even requested that of my wife. But with that being said, the other side to that whole piece about an open relationship and whether it be approved by your spouse or not is, would there be mutual allowance for these kinds of relationships? Like, would the man also be obligated to allow his woman to have these extramarital relationships? And one of the things that I talk about in the book is I think there's levels of infidelity. For example, now, a lot of women are not going to like this statement, Maliek, but see, not all infidelity poses a danger to the marriage, not at least for the man, because of what that clip said. A man can have sex with another woman and have not one single solitary interest at all in leaving his wife or even entertaining leaving his family for this woman. For him, just as she says, it was just an orgasm. It was just fun. The danger is if some woman gets his heart or if somebody else gets his heart, that's when the marriage can be in danger. That's for a man, because if he gets emotionally attached to somebody, that's hard to break. But a man can go in and out of relationships all over the country and have conquest and not have an emotional attachment. I believe that. But will his wife allow it, and will she view it that way? I think that conversation should continue to some level. I'd be curious to know what your audience thinks about that and what other people have to say about it.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, it has a lot of layers to it, but something that stands out to me is I think something shifted, I would say, from my childhood to adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like what I've noticed is there used to be a situation where there's an expectation that to get with this woman, you have to come, and I'm speaking culturally, specifically, Black people, where if you want this woman, you have to commit to her. And it's not negotiable. Mm-hmm. And if you are going to cheat, if you want to keep her, you better make sure it never comes to light. Mm-hmm. There was an understood and kind of respect or non-negotiableness of cheating. And I feel like in my time of being young to an adult, I've observed that kind of diminish. And whereas I've seen many women really be in a position, and I think this is more so in the dating space. I can't really speak for marriages, but some marriages too, like we mentioned, Monique. But there's this thing where now I hear a lot of women just saying, that's just how men are. You can't trip if he cheats. Cheating shouldn't end a relationship. And even as far as saying it's childish for a woman to leave just because he did a little cheating. What do you think about, have you observed that change as far as the standards? And what do you think is at play in terms of what we accept, men and women?
I don't see a lot of that, to be honest with you. What I see is women, husbands and wives, couples coming in my office for counseling, and the woman is almost inconsolable when she discovers that her husband was being unfaithful. Yeah, I see women who don't know they don't know what to do. They don't know how to recover. What didn't I do? Why would you do this to me? And how could you? And what else did you do? And why should I give him another chance? And I don't know. And I want to kill him. Sometimes I just want to kill him, but I still love him. But I don't know. He needs help. And I see a volatility of pain and trauma and distrust and fracturing of families. I see in 911, in urgent care of marriages, those relationships where infidelity has been exposed, and it's not a pretty picture. I do not see women sitting in my office, and I'm not saying they don't exist, but I do not see women sitting in my office saying, oh, he's just a guy. He's just, as long as he keeps it out of my house. Well, obviously they wouldn't need a meeting with me. But I see women who can't pull themselves together, who can't function, who are losing weight, who are having health problems, crisis, having difficulty reconnecting with the man. I see guys just feeling an amazing amount of shame and embarrassment. It's as if like there was no sex worth this kind of trauma that I just caused this woman who I love. I never meant to cause her this pain. And there's no explanation good enough for her. So if the shift is happening, it hasn't hit my world. And the fact that I've written this book, I'm seeing more and more people saying, how can we get through this? Now, I would agree. And I got a friend in Grapevine, Texas. Her name is Debbie Wade. And she says that 80 to 85% of marriages that experience infidelity do survive it. Now, surviving it and recovering from it is different.
Yeah.
Some survive it because statistically, anyone who's cheated in a relationship is 3 times more likely to cheat in the future than somebody who's never done it. So cheats do repeat. It is a pattern that is very difficult to break without 3 very important things being in place. One is an absolute admission to wrong, a high level of accountability, because you can't break the rules, then make the rules. You got to submit to the rules of your significant other now, as it relates to accountability, access to phones, access to passwords, etc. And then there've got to be incredibly strong boundaries, eliminating access to the former side chick or side slick, whoever the person was engaged with. Because believe it or not, no matter how much pain infidelity costs a relationship, the person who was unfaithful still misses the person they were cheating with. And that's the emotional side of it. And you know why they miss them? Because even though it was wrong, it was meeting a need. And if I still have that need and it's not being met that way, well, how am I going to meet it now? Because there were deficiencies in the relationship that made me explore that kind of option. What am I going to do to fill those gaps going forward? And that's the complexity of it, that the person still feels like cheating, even though the cheating almost ruined their career, messed their platforms up, almost destroyed their homes and had them in divorce court. They still want to do it. And maybe some of that goes back to the clip you played and how men are wired. But some of it is, I think, on an emotional level, how do I medicate emotional pain, loneliness, emptiness in healthy ways, like non-sexual connections with healthy relationships?
Yeah.
That's having a tribe, having a community. Man, sometimes when I hang out with my guys and we just playing Monopoly or hanging out watching a game or something, like I don't need to have sex to have connection and to have relationships that fulfill me and get me through another night without having to feel like I got to call Keisha, to get through the night. That's another thing, building that balance into our life. But I go back to that. But that's the full circle of it for me, is making sure that we understand that even though there's a push in society for this open kind of thing where there's an understanding that men will cheat, I'm telling you from personal experience, every day I'm seeing people who are devastated by this behavior and not in any way tolerating it.
On August 1st through 2nd, the Jude 3 Project will be hosting its 2nd annual Courageous Conversations Conference. Courageous Conversations is Jude 3 Project's annual gathering that pairs Black voices trained in conservative and progressive spaces to discuss topics that are relevant for the church and culture. Panelists include Dr. E. Dewey Smith, Jackie Hill Perry, and Pastor Brian Loritz. Topics include rethinking hell, the nature of sin, and Paul's sexual ethics. You can register at courageousconvos.org.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to make light of it. I completely understand that being your experience as a pastor with Christian couples coming in to try to resolve these issues. And I definitely know that that's there and believe it. But I was just more so referring to my observation is based on things I'm hearing more in popular culture, hip hop radio, podcasts, things of that nature, typically dealing with the age bracket of 18 and 35, which is, I think, still considered millennials. So it's just both. I think both can be true, obviously.
Sure.
But also, I'm going to present 2 options, and if it's neither, feel free to offer another. Okay. I think what I've heard when these types of conversations happen is The woman is hurt deeply by her man cheating, and she's emotional about it. And a lot of times the response from a guy is either not even really being able to articulate why he cheated, because her question is always, well, why? If you love me, why? And a common response is, well, I do love you, and me doing this has nothing to do with you. And then once again, you mentioned that it does repeat. So it's like the question becomes, if you love me, why do you do this thing that you know will hurt me? And I've heard some say it's on the responsibility of women to lower their expectation or their perception of what is going on, rather than seeing it as a high level issue in terms of him being connected to another person emotionally and disconnected from you emotionally, to lower that and realize it's simply a basic level physical act, nothing to see here. Now, self control is a conversation, but damage in terms of the connection within the relationship, don't think that deep about it. So, on one end, I've heard women need to kind of lower their perception of what's going on, or how they're the seriousness of it, or how they're perceiving it. But on the other end, you'll hear men need to, I don't feel like I hear this as much, but men need to recognize, even if the act is just physical for you, the implications are more severe. Why are you not at a point where you're making decisions based off of effect, not in the moment? More simply put, why potentially cause all this damage in your marriage and with your family, potentially break it all apart over a person you don't love and who you were just simply trying to get an orgasm with?
Well, that's because nobody that does it thinks they're going to get caught. See, one of the thrills of infidelity is this very strategic behavior. When you were growing up, do you remember playing hide and seek?
Yeah.
So every kid played hide and seek, right? So somebody counts to 10, closes their eyes while the other people run and hide somewhere. Well, if you had a great hiding spot, you remember the kind of thrill that you had, the internal thrill that you had, your heart racing and palpitating because they can't find me. In fact, they can't find you. This is Wednesday. They still haven't found you yet. And if you ever had a partner that you were hiding with, and the two of you were so good at hiding that you're like, we're killing this game because nobody knows where we are. We're a team. Well, that same kind of high or rush happens when two people have a secret relationship. So it's not just the orgasm thrill, it's the adrenaline rush of outthinking everybody, of being able to change the way a person is identified in the phone. So if I'm in a relationship and my wife knows you, Malik, and knows that you and I converse from time to time, I can put another person's name in as Malik because I'm getting a lot of texts and calls, but they're coming from Malik. So there's no suspicion there, but it's not really you. It's the side chick, right? So that whole game, the strategic energy and effort and time that goes into it, make people think, because it's not always just impulsive. Most relationships that are unfaithful, when it gets to sexual, require some level of grooming, some level of nurturing, some level of setting up. In the world of sexual predators, grooming is when the predator builds this relationship with the kid where they're building trust, and you can trust me and I'll get you something for your birthday. And they're just setting the kid up. Well, in adult infidelity, the grooming is similar. The two people are just setting each other up, just making sure, hey, I'm throwing out clues. Are you interested in going down this path as I am? And so it's very strategic. One of the reasons why men take these risks is because they believe that they can cover their bases and keep it disclosed. So I think it's more, the reason why it continues to happen is because most people feel like there's no way I'm going to get caught with this because we're going to play this off. You can have people, a lot of infidelity happens at work. You can have two people that work together and nobody has figured out that these two people are fooling around. They see each other all the time and they play it off. They interact with each other as if they're just cool colleagues, and they have these codes and they have these ways of communicating with each other. And that's the bottom line. Most people believe that they're going to get away with it. And here's the other thing about that, Malik. Most acts of infidelity or most unfaithful relationships do not stop with close calls. They only stop with catastrophe. That's the severity of it.
Mm-hmm.
People do not stop at close calls. They only stop at catastrophe. What do I mean by that? When somebody almost gets caught, or their significant or their spouse says, "Hey, who is Keisha? Or who is Darlene? Why is she calling you?" "Oh, you know that ain't nobody. That's somebody. I don't know why she called me. I don't know what you ask her. I don't know." And he's dead wrong. But he has because 95% of people who are confronted with infidelity initially deny it. And the reason why they deny it is because they've been in hiding so long that when you uncover them, their first response is not, "You got me." Their first response is to deny it because, first of all, they got to let the person know that they've been cheating with, "Hey, they're on to us." And their first reaction is to tighten up the security. But most unfaithful relationships don't end with close calls because people can even try to stop it. Be like, "We need to cut this out. I'm not calling you anymore. Leave me alone." And 2 weeks later, they're back hot and heavy again. They only stop when they get caught. And some people are actually relieved when they get caught. I was talking to a police officer once who does interrogation, and he says, one of the ways we know when we've caught the right person who's been a fugitive is when we set them in the interrogation room, the right person always goes to sleep in the interrogation room while they're waiting on us. He says the wrong person is always in there paranoid, walking around, pacing the floor, scared to death. The right person always goes to sleep. You know why? Because it's a relief. They finally got me. And some people who are cheating have been so exhausted by the process of hiding and the guilt and shame that comes with it that sometimes when they get caught, that's the only way out.
I know that some may hear that and think about the priority in terms of it doesn't seem like, I'm sure this has happened, but it doesn't seem like the ongoing trend is a guy's in a relationship, some random woman who he has no idea who she is. They cross eyes and have unintended sex in a public space just off the cuff. There's normally some type of investment or preparation that built up to that moment where the affair happened, and then additional work and mental space that's done to sustain it and continue it. I don't know that I'm regularly seeing or hearing about, "Oh yeah, I don't even know her name, but we just saw each other and something happened." Maybe if you know you go to the club, you get drunk, and you have a one night stand, and you never see the person again. Maybe in that scenario, but a lot of times, as you mentioned, there are affairs that are being protected, even as far as trying to hide someone's name or give an alias on the phone and so on and so forth. So I know that the offended party, the woman who's cheated on, would probably raise the question that it's not as simple as just as the audio clip was mentioning. It's not just a physical thing. In that, all this extra work was done to create this space and sustain it. I know a lot of guys, texting is a thing. So I know people in relationships that keep tabs on other women. There's the main, and then there's 6 that are in the cut just in case something goes wrong. And they may not be dating them, but they keep them in the loop just in case they need to call them up to the front. And that in and of itself takes work to keep tabs on additional people outside of your relationship. So I know the question would then become, if even with you saying that they do these things without the expectation of getting caught, they do these things also knowing there is a risk. They know that there's a risk. They may not expect to get caught, but they know that there's a risk. So at some point in time, this guy's making a conscious choice, whether once or multiple times, to risk. And I would argue at that point, it seems as if though a decision has been made. Is this physical pleasure? Is the choice is between physical pleasure that's temporary or risk? And it doesn't seem as if though the risk is striking enough fear to not partake in the physical pleasure. So a value judgment has been made, and that then I would say hurts the other party.
When people try to wrap their mind around infidelity, Why?
Uh-huh.
That's the purpose of the book. Why do men and women cheat, right? Why would somebody continue to put so much at risk? Why? Right? Well, part of it is let's deal with the science of sex. There are not too many things in this world that can compare to an orgasm. What an orgasm does to the human brain, the chemicals that are released in the human brain, I've been told the only other thing that comes close to it is bungee jumping. And if I got to make a choice between jumping off a cliff and having sex, sex is winning 100 times. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain things we almost act like this ain't as fun as this thing is fun. Like anybody that's ever had an orgasm and didn't think it was the one of the most thrilling things. Like you can't. It's an unduplicable, ethereal. Like it's space agey kind of a moment, right? So you got that. Then you have the fact that somebody's catering to you, because when you're having an affair, when you're in a regular relationship, a real relationship, not this fantasy relationship, because affairs are fantasy relationships. In a real relationship, you're paying bills together. You're dealing with disciplining children together. You got arguments. You got dirty laundry. You smell morning breath. You got, you smell gym clothes. I mean, you got all of that. When you're in the affair, in the fantasy relationship, everybody smells good. Everybody looks good. Most people are at their best. You don't pay bills together. You're not disciplining kids together. You got your own families. So this is an escape from everything else. It's an escape. It's like a spa. It's like a carnival. It's like an amusement park. It's an orgasm. It's pleasurable. It's sensual. It smells good. It's wonderful. That thing is addictive. Like you can't match it anywhere else because it's make believe. It's like going to Disney World. And it's just a text away. Like, when can we meet? It's like, we're going to set up Disney World at this location. We're going to set up Disney World at this location. And people are missing time from work and people are not where they're supposed to be. And you say you're going to be here. It's so addictive. It is such a hard act to follow because there's so many real life factors that are missing from it. So that makes it very tempting to continue it.
Sure.
In fact, here's what I want side chicks to understand, because there's side chicks going to be listening, like particularly that side chick who doesn't just accept her role as a side chick, that she's seconds. Because when you go to a restaurant, they don't tell you when the waiter tells you what their specials are tonight, they never mention the sides. They mention some kind of steak, some kind of fish, some kind of chicken, some kind of beef. They don't say, and we got a coleslaw in collard green special. No, that's sides. So when you understand that, you have to understand that when a man is married and he has a side chick, he's not going to leave his wife for the side chick typically, because having a side chick makes his marriage more manageable. It makes it more tolerable. The marriage was terrible. You become an outlet. Now he can go home and deal with you because he's already been with the side chick for the last 3 hours. So now he comes home, he's washing dishes, playing with the kids. He's got a newfound energy because he's got this outlet, this little playground he can go to, I guess, which is better than happy hour for him. So that's another thing about this whole world of infidelity. It is a hard world to compete with.
Definitely.
It goes beyond the virtual world of pornography. That's why pornography is so addictive, because a man doesn't have to he can have erectile dysfunction and beat a man on a porn site. He can have premature ejaculation. He can have halitosis. He can be a poor communicator. He can be financially irresponsible.
Mm-hmm.
He can be immature. He can be overweight. He can be all that. But if he's got the internet, he is the man on the internet, and he can get him any way he wants. He can say, I want blonde hair, big butt. I want dark skin, big boobs. I mean, that's like, you understand what I'm saying? He can't walk down the street with no job, and he don't even know how to pull his pants up. Whatever. He doesn't know. He's unkempt and all of that. He had to be anything. So that whole world actually trains a person, by the way. for pornography is a whole different subject. It actually trains a person how to be sexual without being connected.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mature a person.
Mm-hmm. And you literally, that's where, throughout this whole interview, you've been kind of going where I was intending to go next ahead of me. So that it makes it flow well. I was going to say it this way. As we've talked through it in the past few minutes, what I was kind of putting together in my head was it seems like there's a desire for relationship without work, or connect, like you said, connection. I would say connection without change, because if you're in a marriage where you're paying the bills together, you're working through each other's baggage and character flaws and communication styles and how I grew up and my dreams and goals and the kids, and I said bills already, and anything else, and health issues, anything else that may come, there is the sex and the physical aspect, but then there's all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the cheating aspect is for me or whoever's in that position to create a reality of a relationship. I remember you said it's not a real one, but it's all the good, remove the bad. So it's like a burger without the fat and the calories and the grease.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I want the good thing, but remove all the bad parts. And if you look at it long term in terms of relationship, it's not necessarily those other aspects are bad, but they do make it hard and difficult. But I would say that points to, and you mentioned this, a maturity thing, but also a misunderstanding of the purpose of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of us, specifically men, we go into it with the expectation that, all right, this is for me to experience ultimate pleasure. That's what this is for.
Mm-hmm.
So the minute I see it deviating from that, I go somewhere else. But if you go in with the right perspective, you'll then probably avoid all the side chicks, the broken relationships, the damaging of women, going into it with the right perspective. And I think a lot of us don't realize it, but we go in thinking, this is my chance to get all I can from a situation. Work is hard, finances are hard, community is hard, racism, politics, financial issues. There's all these other areas where I'm not really winning, but we go into a relationship expecting this to be my opportunity for me to be the center of attention and receive ultimate pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And that's putting too much weight on the other person.
well, yeah, and I think to your point also, what it does is what cheating does to me is it continues to retard my committed relationship, because if I can go somewhere else to get the burger without the grease and without the fat, when that's what I'm supposed to get in my marriage, but I'm not supposed to get it in my marriage because let's put it this way, because I'm not married to a porn site or to a person who provides sex on demand.
Mm-hmm.
I'm married to a person who has feelings and wants to be respected and valued and treated properly. Then I have to learn how to do those things so that I can get what I want. Because I found that if people worked as much on their marriage as they do on the affair, then they could have a great marriage. Because actually the affair takes work. It's just the affair gives more short-term rewards. Like the ROI is faster, and there's less history. And so you don't have a lot to overcome. And that's why they call it cheating, right? Because it's like in the world of academics, if I don't study like the person sitting next to me who was up for 3 straight nights, learning all the material, taking notos, drinking coffee, trying to stay up so that they sit in front of the exam and they give it all they've got because they've been studying. But the other person's got the answers from some book or somebody, they've taken a shortcut. So cheating is a shortcut.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't do the work. And you can get results cheating, but the consequences of getting caught may be a bigger check than your account can afford.
You may have heard about a growing movement called the Black Hebrew Israelites. They seek to draw away from the Christian faith. Equip yourself to engage with and refute their claims by tuning into the Engaging Hebrew Israelites video on YouTube, hosted by the Vision Church channel.
I want to close with this. I think that culturally speaking, the conversation around cheating, let's just say specifically with men, typically doesn't go where we went today. A lot of times amongst ourselves, I don't even think we as men talk about, all right, like even as a, let's just say you're a friend and you realize your friend has been in 7 relationships over the past 2 years and they all ended because he cheated.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we don't stop and talk to each other like, bro, what you doing? We don't have those conversations. And if it is assessed, it's just kind of chalked up to, how it is being a man. We got these hormones, what happens, it is what it is. So because amongst ourselves, we kind of just accept that in terms of thinking about Christianity and monogamy and getting married and so on and so forth, I think a lot of guys, even in the church, accept this idea of a lack of self-control and kind of sleeping around as just the way it is. Hopefully she'll understand. God understands. He gave me these emotions. He gave me these hormones. He know what it is. And I think a lot of times what I've seen, unfortunately, is guys don't process through that or get to a point where they recognize what they're getting into. And they think, even though they've kind of been messing around all of their single life, they think that once they get married, overnight, they're going to just snap and all of a sudden understand what monogamy is. So as a married man, married for years, could you speak to what you think would be a healthy approach to transitioning from not really having self-control sexually to pursuing monogamy to marriage?
I think you hit it on the head, man. I think without even trying, let's just say, maybe I'm using the word a little loosely to say it's promiscuity. But if we can agree to call it promiscuity, for lack of a better term, if a man is promiscuous while he's single, that means he's sexually active. He doesn't have to be sleeping everywhere, but he's not celibate.
Yeah.
I believe by pattern, we're training ourselves for that behavior in marriage. So promiscuity in dating leads to infidelity in marriage. It's just a pattern. I've never been faithful. I've never had a period of my life where I've had to be celibate. I think a period of celibacy leading up to a marriage is very sacred. I would say at least 3 to 6 months would be great, because there are going to be times in marriage, quite possibly, where sex is not going to be possible because of some illness or situation. It could be a highly sensitive pregnancy, a woman on bed rest, a travel schedule. And if there's never been any history where we've learned how to love each other and connect and take care of each other sexually without intercourse, then what am I supposed to do when I first face it? And I think the more a person can train to, and I even say this, because I tend to think this is a spiritual issue as well. I think that people should dedicate their bodies in their bed to God on their wedding night. Like, instead of just going in and going for the kill and leaving the reception and going for it, maybe bowing down with the tux and the gown on and saying, God, we're so grateful you brought us together. Now this night we consecrate our relationship. As we consummate this marriage, we commit our bodies in this bed. It may be a hotel that night, but whatever bed we lay in, we commit it to you. May we always be satisfied with each other's love. May we always find fulfillment from one another. That's why it's important for a man to look in his wife's eyes when they're making love. Don't cut the lights off. Connection, because it brings muscle memory. That if every time I orgasm, I'm looking at my wife, I've trained my body that that's the only person I should orgasm with. Because there's so much old stuff in my mind. I can never erase all the other relationships I've had or even porn that I've watched, but I can replace it. the more Vicky I see, the more connections with Vicky, the stronger, the more faithful, the more monogamous I become because I'm connected to her. It's not just sex. I'm connected to her. That's why I think just like avoiding colds, the best way to avoid a cold is to be very healthy yourself. The best way to avoid infidelity is to have a strong, healthy marriage. And I think that starts in courtship. And it starts with consecrating our sexual life and setting. Let's see if we can go a period of time while we're dating up to our wedding. And let's be celibate. And let's learn to connect with each other on all the other wonderful levels that we need to know each other on. So that sex doesn't have to be the dominant part. Because as soon as sex enters a relationship, it clouds the relationship. It becomes more of a central part of the relationship. And some of the more important things like values, goals, are we headed in the same direction? What do we believe about educating our children? What do we believe about holidays? What about worship? What do we believe about God? Some of those things can get lost in the passion of sexual attraction. And those are some of the things that keep relationships together, keep people committed to one another.
Well, man, Pastor Battle, I have to say, I think that was a convicting word that you may or may not have realized, specifically saying, lights on and look her in the eye, just because, to be honest with you, I know that for many that have not, waited until marriage and so on and so forth, for a lot of guys, that connection isn't wanted. So to be honest, it's in music, and there's a norm of face down, backside up when it comes to sex, because that connection isn't wanted. So to kind of flip that on its head and show the importance of connection, and not just looking at sex as, a physical act with the person you're not connected to, I think presents it from a new perspective that is helpful. So I definitely appreciate that. Go ahead.
And I know we got to go, but I don't want to seem like boring that different positions, sexual positions, aren't exciting, pleasurable.
Yeah.
I don't want just sex in one direction, but I do want to, during the intimacy encounter, to have time where I'm looking in my wife's eyes and talking to her about how much I love her. But it doesn't mean that there's only one position that you can have sex in order to be connected. But even if you're behind, if you're behind the person, make sure you stay connected.
Yeah. It's not to dismiss that at all, but I do know that it is a thing for many that are, I would say in an unhealthy space where you're just guys that are sleeping with women that aren't really trying to connect to them. The go-to is turning her around and being in the dark because there's no desire for a personal connection.
Absolutely.
And that is a problem in and of itself, but that's another episode for another day. But for those that are interested in the book or want to connect with you, how do they do that?
Well, the best way to get with me is on social media at Keith Battle. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at Keith Battle. SagacityCompany.com. If you're single, go to SagacityCompany.com, SAGACITY, company spelled out. You can download a free chapter of my book that I wrote specifically for singles. You can get that on our website. And the book is available online, Amazon. It's on Kindle, Nook, Barnes and Nobles. You can get a hard copy, paperback. Just go to Amazon, best place to go to get it.
Thank you. We appreciate you for joining us today and also taking the time to write this book and start a necessary conversation. Hopefully it will lead to some accountability, restored marriages, or even opening people's mind to the idea of marriage if they weren't looking at sex or monogamy or relationships in a healthy way. So we appreciate you. This is Maliek Blade, and that was Guest Who.